It was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life. And maybe, for everyone else in that ballroom, it was. But for me, standing there with a trembling glass of champagne in my hand, it felt like I'd wandered into a place I no longer belonged. The lights were too bright, the laughter too loud, and every smile that passed my way seemed to carry a question: who let her in? I'd spent weeks choosing the right dress. Simple. Pale blue. Something soft that reminded me of the sea. I thought it looked elegant, but surrounded by women in silk and diamonds, it suddenly felt wrong, small, old, out of place. I could feel Amber's mother watching me. That quiet kind of inspection that doesn't need words. And when the usher leaned in to tell me my seat had been changed to the back, near the door, I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe they needed the front rows for the bridal family. Maybe it was just logistics. But my heart knew better. From the distance, I watched David laughing, his arm around his bride. He looked so handsome, so full of life. And for a moment I let myself remember when he used to reach for my hand instead. When he used to look at me like I was home. Now, he barely met my eyes. Maybe he was too busy. Or maybe it was easier not to see me. The music swelled as the guests raised their glasses, and I tried to do the same. My hands shook slightly. Not from age, but from the effort of holding myself together. I smiled when people turned my way, though no one really did. The scent of roses filled the air, expensive, heavy, almost suffocating. Somewhere deep inside, I could still feel the echo of pride, the memory of being the mother of the groom. But sitting there, surrounded by glitter and laughter, that pride turned hollow. When the ceremony began, everyone rose, their faces glowing with joy. I stayed quiet, clutching my small purse in my lap. From the last row, I could barely see the altar, just flashes of white and gold through a forest of heads. And as I sat there, invisible, uninvited in spirit, if not in name, I realized that this was what distance felt like. Not miles, not time, just silence, dressed in celebration. I lowered my eyes and whispered a small prayer that no one could hear. Not for forgiveness, not for love, just for strength. Because somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. Sometimes I think the years before everything fell apart feel softer in my memory than they really were, like sunlight filtered through lace curtains. Back then, my world was small, but it was full. Our house was modest, painted white with a porch that creaked under my husband's heavy boots when he came home from work. I used to wait by the window, watching the light fade as I graded my students' essays, listening for that familiar sound. Life wasn't grand, but it was steady, stitched together by the kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken every day. David was still a boy, then curious, stubborn, always asking questions about how things worked. I remember his laughter filling the kitchen as we made pancakes on Sunday mornings, his little hands dusted with flour. I used to believe that those small moments would last forever, that the bond between us was something unbreakable. When my husband got sick, time seemed to blur. Hospitals became our second home, and silence took the place of conversation. I tried to stay strong, holding his hand through it all. But the day he left this world, it felt like the air itself turned thin. After that, the house grew too quiet. The porch creaked less often. David called, at first, to check in. Later, out of obligation. I could hear it in his voice, that distance, polite but cold, as if he were speaking to someone from a different life. I filled my days with simple things: gardening, reading, volunteering at the library, trying to pretend that solitude was a choice. But it wasn't. It was something handed to me when love and purpose were taken away. Looking back now, I realized that losing my husband wasn't the hardest part. It was learning how to fade, how to keep existing when no one seems to notice you're still here. Maybe that's why. At the wedding, the pain cut so deep. I had already been grieving a long time before that day. I just didn't know what I was mourning until I found myself sitting alone. Again. The ballroom shimmered like a dream, golden chandeliers, crystal glasses, soft jazz humming in the background. Every detail had been planned with precision. From the towering white roses to the satin ribbons wrapped around each chair. It should have been beautiful. It was beautiful. But to me, it felt like standing inside someone else's life, a life I'd once imagined for my son. But one that no longer had room for me. I tried to blend into the noise, into the laughter that rose and fell like waves. I smiled when faces turned my way, nodding politely, pretending not to notice the way some eyes flicked down at my simple dress before sliding away. Amber floated through the room like a queen, flawless and shining. David followed close behind her, his hand gently resting on her back, the same hand that once clung to mine when he was afraid of thunder. Now, he didn't look toward me unsa. There was a moment, just before the speeches began, when I caught his gaze from across the room. It was brief, a flicker, like a match in the dark. But instead of warmth, there was something else there. Discomfort. Maybe shame. Then he turned away. And I understood. It wasn't that he'd forgotten me. It was that remembering me didn't fit the story he was telling the world tonight. The room filled with laughter as someone made a toast. But all I could hear was the dull hum of the air conditioner and the faint chime of silverware. I tried to take a sip of champagne, though my throat felt tight. The bubbles stung, sharp and bitter. My hands trembled as I set the glass down. I could feel the distance between us stretching wider, not measured in feet, but in years of silence and unspoken disappointment. Amber's mother glanced at me once, offering a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. I returned it. The way you return something unwanted, carefully, quietly. My seat was at the edge of the room, near the door where the servers passed with trays of food I hadn't touched. Each laugh, each cheer, seemed to push me further into the shadows. I folded my hands in my lap and focused on breathing. Steady and shallow. No one noticed when I blinked back tears. No one looked when I pressed my napkin against my eyes. Around me, the world kept celebrating, and I sat there, invisible in the glow of chandeliers, holding on to a glass that had long since gone warm, pretending it was enough to keep me from breaking. That was the moment I realized you can lose someone long before they're gone. And sometimes, the cruelest kind of rejection doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones you gave everything to love. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the golden light shimmering off half-empty glasses. The laughter around me had become distant, like an echo from another world. I was invisible again, tucked into a corner no one would remember existed. My hands rested on my lap, still as stone, until I felt the chair beside me move. Someone sat down. Not a waiter. Not a relative, trying to make polite conversation, someone deliberate. I turned slightly, expecting another empty smile. Another stranger who didn't know where else to sit. But when I looked up, I saw a man, silver hair, a well-cut suit, calm eyes that didn't wander or pity. There was something steady in the way he carried himself. Something quietly sure. Like he didn't need to belong to the room to own it. He didn't say anything at first. He just placed his drink down beside mine and nodded. Almost imperceptibly. A small gesture. But somehow it changed everything. People glanced our way, curious now. I could feel the shift in their gaze. The woman who had been whispering behind her hand stopped. Amber's mother looked over, confused. For the first time that evening, I wasn't invisible. The man leaned back slightly, his cufflink catching the light, a flash of silver that drew my eyes for just a second. The faint scent of his cologne drifted between us, warm and familiar, though I couldn't place it. He carried no arrogance, no intrusion, only a presence that felt safe. I found myself straightening in my seat, lifting my chin without realizing it. When our eyes met, something inside me flickered recognition. Maybe. Or the echo of a name I hadn't spoken in decades. The band played a slow tune, the kind meant for couples still in love. And I felt my breath catch in my chest. I didn't understand why. But sitting next to him, the noise of the room seemed to fade. The ache in my chest softened, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years, the faint, fragile pulse of being seen. As I watched his hand rest quietly near mine, I felt a strange certainty growing, gentle but insistent. I didn't know who he was yet, but my heart, somehow, already did. When he finally spoke my name, it felt like the world folded in on itself. The sound of it soft. Deliberate carried decades inside it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart, which had felt so tired for so long, seemed to stumble over itself trying to remember how to beat. Edward Blake. I hadn't heard that name in more than 40 years. And yet, it had lived somewhere in me all this time. Waiting. His face had changed. Of course, more lines. A little gray. The quiet confidence of someone who had learned how to live through loss. But the eyes were the same. Gentle. Kind. The same eyes that once looked at me across a college library table. When the future felt wide open and simple, as I sat there, the memories came back in fragments, the scent of coffee on autumn afternoons, the way his hand brushed mine when we studied late, the promise of a life we were too young to understand. And then, just as quickly, came the ache. The letters I never received, the silence I had mistaken for rejection. I had built my whole adult life around that absence, telling myself he had simply moved on. But he hadn't. He told me about the letters how he had written for years after graduation, waiting for me to reply, how each envelope had been returned, unopened. It was my mother, he said. She hadn't approved. She wanted me to marry someone practical. She had hidden his words, buried a love that could have been my life. I felt the air leave my lungs. All those years, the confusion, the loneliness, the wondering why I was never enough had been built on a lie. I looked at him and saw not just the man he had become, but the boy I had lost. He smiled then. A sad, beautiful smile that softened everything around us. He told me he never married, that he had searched for me, quietly, through the years. And sitting there, beneath the soft light of that lavish room, I realized that fate hadn't forgotten me after all. It had just taken the long way back. The evening had shifted. I could feel it before I even understood why. The air inside the reception hall seemed lighter somehow, though the music hadn't changed. Nor had the chandeliers dimmed. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the way Edward stood beside me, calm, unbothered, as if I had every right to be exactly where I was. And for the first time that day, I believed it too. We walked together through the crowd. Not hurried. Not hidden. People who had avoided my eyes earlier now smiled politely. Even stopped to greet me. Amber's friends, who had whispered behind their manicured hands, suddenly seemed unsure of themselves. I saw Amber across the room, her perfect posture faltering for just a second, when she noticed Edward's hand resting lightly on my arm. David's expression was harder to read, a mixture of confusion and something that almost looked like guilt. Edward didn't need to say a word. His presence spoke for him, the quiet authority of a man who had built his own place in the world and carried it effortlessly. He introduced me to people I didn't know, included me in conversations I'd once been invisible to. But more than that, he made space for me without claiming it for himself. He looked at me not as someone fragile or forgotten, but as someone equal, someone seen. I began to stand taller, to speak with ease. The stiffness in my shoulders faded, replaced by a warmth that spread quietly through me. I noticed the smallest details, the way people's tones softened, how waiters offered me wine before anyone else at the table. Respect, once denied, was finding its way back. And I didn't need to demand it. It simply returned when I stopped apologizing for existing. The band played softly in the background, and laughter floated through the air like smoke. I caught my reflection in the glass near our table, the same woman who had sat alone hours before. But different now. My eyes no longer carried the ache of being unseen. That night, I realized something that should have always been clear: dignity isn't something others can give or take. It lives quietly within us, waiting for the moment we decide to stand up and remember who we are. And in that moment, surrounded by the very people who once made me feel small, I felt whole again. The dinner was served in one of those quiet, private rooms, the kind meant for celebration. But tonight, it felt more like a stage. The table was long and polished, candles flickering in crystal holders, their reflections dancing in the glasses. The air carried that faint tension that no one speaks of but everyone feels. I could hear the steady rhythm of silver against porcelain, the occasional forced laugh, the way silence filled the spaces between words. David sat across from me, his expression composed but uneasy. He kept his focus on his plate, avoiding my eyes. Amber tried to maintain her smile, that practiced social one she wore so easily, but her hand tightened around her wine glass every time Edward spoke. He didn't speak often, only when needed. His voice calm, steady, and precise. He had a way of taking up space without dominance, the kind of presence that demanded attention through quiet confidence. I watched the shift happen gradually. The polite distance began to dissolve. Questions hung in the air, unspoken, but heavy. I saw the moment David realized that Edward wasn't just some acquaintance, that the man sitting beside his mother was someone who had known her in ways he never could. The discomfort in his eyes wasn't anger, it was recognition. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to finally be heard, to finally sit across from my son and not be dismissed, pitied, or ignored. And now, here I was, not pleading or explaining, simply existing in my truth. Every word I spoke was measured, every pause intentional. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My silence carried the weight of every year I had swallowed my pain. Edward's hand rested near mine on the table, steadying me without words. When Amber made some sharp remark disguised as politeness, I smiled, not with bitterness, but with the calm certainty of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. The candles had burned lower by the time the plates were cleared. The tension had quieted into something else, not peace. Not yet, but understanding. I rose from the table slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the boy I had loved, the one who used to hold my hand without shame. As I walked out of that room, I felt the air shift again, lighter now, like something long trapped had finally been released. For the first time in years, my heart felt steady, not proud, not bitter, just free. The morning after the wedding, I found myself sitting across from Amber's mother in a hotel lounge that smelled faintly of expensive perfume and burnt coffee. She had called it a friendly chat, but everything about her posture, the tilt of her chin, The measured tone of her voice told me otherwise. On the table between us lay an envelope, thick and pristine, slid toward me with the kind of ease that only comes from habit. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of it. Not in dollars, but in what it represented, an attempt to buy silence, to smooth over discomfort with the soft rustle of money. Once, a gesture like that might have made me hesitate, not out of greed, but out of fear of being seen as small, of being dismissed again. But that fear was gone now. She spoke with the elegance of someone who'd never had to apologize for anything. I listened, nodding politely, letting her believe she was in control. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: amusement. She thought she was offering power. What she didn't understand was that I no longer needed hers. When she paused, waiting for acknowledgement, I pushed the envelope back across the table. My hands were steady. There was no anger, no sharpness, just certainty. The look in her eyes shifted, just slightly. The faintest crack in her composure. For a moment, she saw me, not as someone to dismiss, but as someone beyond her reach. As I walked out of that room, sunlight caught the glass doors ahead of me, and I caught my own reflection, calm, upright, and whole. Money could buy many things, I thought, but never the kind of peace that comes from knowing your worth. That I had finally reclaimed. It happened a few weeks later at a small community fundraiser, the kind of event where the town gathered for coffee, conversation, and quiet gestures of charity. I hadn't expected to see them there, David and Amber, but when they walked in, I felt no rush of anger, no sting of old pain, only calm. I had carried that weight long enough, it no longer belonged to me. When our eyes met, David hesitated before approaching. His expression was different, softer, uncertain, almost boyish again. Amber stood beside him, her usual poise replaced by something genuine, almost shy. There were no grand speeches, no theatrics, just a few simple words, carried in the tone of someone who finally understood the cost of what they had done. And that was enough. I didn't need to see them crumble. I only needed to see them recognize my worth. As I listened, I felt Edward's quiet presence nearby, his gaze steady, reassuring. I realized that this moment wasn't about apology or blame. It was about release. Forgiving them didn't excuse the hurt, it freed me from it. And for the first time in years, I felt truly light. Later, as I walked home, the evening air was cool and gentle against my skin. The streetlights flickered softly, and I thought about how strange life can be, how pain, when faced with grace, can turn into something softer, almost beautiful. If I've learned anything, it's that dignity isn't found in being right, it's found in staying kind when the world gives you every reason not to be. Family isn't about perfection, it's about choosing love over pride. And self-worth, that's something no one can hand you. You find it the moment you stop waiting for permission to stand tall.